Good afternoon again, and thank you very much for attending this meeting. Now we are in real life, and we have plenty of questions that we will try to solve most of them, but I'm sure that we will not be able to answer all of those because of the lack of time. We expect to have a half an hour Q&A, and I would like to start asking Lisa Dippendale, the officer of the European Commission. I'll try to mix some questions in one. The first one, or the question is, how is the European Commission thinking of suggesting or forcing in the next calls to use these guidelines? And if there's any idea of using these guidelines that is the European Commission prone to support the cost of these new methodologies, the videos and different outputs? Thank you, Lisa.
Hello, good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's been really an interesting session and event, and it's great to be part of it. For the questions you ask, for the European Commission, of course, informed consent is really important, and we try to support research ethics, education, training, and the provision of materials. But of course, as you also indicated, this is applicable to a specific type of research and maybe not readily available to other types of research. That being said, of course, the approach in general, and to continue to see how we can improve consent and to support these participatory processes to consent, the co-creation, especially when vulnerable populations are involved, is definitely something that we will further consider in our framework program. But the need for tailoring, of course, also prevents us from saying this is the right approach for one specific line of research. So that being said, I think more important is that we should consider for the future, also in the evaluation of our projects and of proposals, is if we see that proposals introduce such suggestions of really going into detail of, for example, co-creation of consent procedures, that this is also valorized in the evaluation of proposals. I think that's an important aspect that we have to consider to support this transformation of consent, and to see that consent becomes really meaningful when it is appropriate and when researchers plan such research and such parts of their work packages.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Turn now for Professor Van Delden. Your intervention stimulated a lot of questions. We will make a selection of them. Now that we have to include a data protection notice, as well as the requirement of ICH GCP in the patient information leaflet, how can we make it simpler? Meeting regulatory requirements and the requirements of our sponsor legal departments versus simplifying the content is not easy.
Yeah, actually, Bale just emailed me, and so I have the list of questions in front of me, and she indicated that I could make a pick out of them. And I did intend to pick up this question indeed, because it is somehow resonating in other questions as well. And actually, I also said it myself in my lecture, that we have this paradox, right? We keep on piling up more demands on the informed consent process. And although every claim is probably somehow justified, the end result is that we have such long forms. I mean, more than 30 pages is not an exception, that actually no one will read it. It will lessen understanding. And so we completely miss our goal. And so the question, both by Robert Keane, but also Dominique Sprimont and Araceli Parra, went precisely in this way. And they said, well, yeah, great, but aren't you making life more difficult rather than making it simpler? And how can we do that? Well, again, I do not have a simple answer here. I think co-creation helps, because if we are able to write the informed consent leaflet in such a way that people will more easily understand what is written, that will help. Another way, which is also, I mean, it's not novel at all, but another thing is that you could try to make a synopsis, which might be maybe 1-2 pages, and then have the rest as an appendix. So both the more legal terms, maybe paragraphs about insurance, maybe even things about the governance of data that are kept for future research could be in such an appendix. But then I can actually show you that there's also a question of someone who says, well, yeah, great. But aren't you at the risk of bias here? That you will put some things in the synopsis and other things maybe in the appendix, and that in itself maybe distorts the picture. So yes, it's all true. I do think we really have to do something about this. The fourth option being, by the way, dynamic consent in such a way that maybe not everything has to be disclosed at the beginning, and maybe can be elaborated further down the road in the project. So this is really a huge problem. And sometimes even the iConsent process project is at a risk of piling up more demands instead of making life simpler. There's one thing that I can add here, and that of course it's not only the task of physicians to do this, or the PI of a research project. This could also be done by other research personnel, and they can really also manage quite a bit of this. Shall I pick the next question, or would you like to do it, Julia?
I guess if you want to address any questions specifically, yeah, you can.
Right, because there was another very interesting one by Katerina Nomidou, who said, well, shouldn't you stress human rights more? And of course, I'm an ethicist, but I'm very happy to stress human rights as a basic for some form of global ethics, perhaps. Indeed, if you would look at the UNESCO document, it's actually the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. So yes, there the human rights are clearly stated. I think human rights are there to protect certain things that we find very important to protect on the basis of ethics. So that's why I devoted my time to explain what the ethical purpose of informed consent is, but certainly not meaning to say that human rights are not important, not at all. Another question which was very interesting, and indeed opening a whole new area of questions, I think, is the one by JL. I don't know who JL is, but that was the initial that I got, who said, I like the idea of broad consent, to call it consent for governance, but would that imply that once you change something in the governance, you actually have to go back to the participants? And I think you're right. And of course, not an administrative change, but if you change something fundamentally in the way that the governance is performed, then you might have to go back to the participants. And that led me to think that indeed we should stop thinking, I guess, of participants as persons who signed off something, a document, somewhere at the beginning of the process, but instead try to see them as a community. And indeed, if at my hospital, a huge academic hospital, I think we should start looking at all the participants in all the research that we do as one big community. And if we change something, then we should alert that community to the fact that we have changed the governance of the way we handle specimen and data. Is that idiot? No, I don't think so. I think that might be the way to go. And of course, if people don't want to participate, don't want to respond, fine, don't do it. But I think we should indeed try to think of people more as a community that we can go back to, that we should also inform about study results, because indeed also the I consent process thinks primarily about the front door, but what about the back door? What do we deliver at the end of the project? Well, please, let's also return results to the individual and to the community who participated in the project. That's also important. And so if you start to think about participants more as a group that is there and that you can communicate with along the road, and maybe not only this project, but longer on even, then I think a change in the consent model could also be at least mentioned to these people, and I think actually to a certain extent also discussed. So these were very interesting questions. There are more, but I'm not sure whether I still have time, because there is a lot of time already gone, of course.
Yes. Thank you, Hans. Let's move to other questions. Maybe we'll go back to you. This is a question especially for Alberto Tosi of OPBG, and is related to the use of new methods and technology, and the problems that we may encounter if we are focusing, and also in your groups, if you are focusing on high level education, or are also low literacy people in their groups and our approach with these new technologies.
Thank you, Javier, and congratulations to all the speakers. It was exciting and amazing. Let me tell you one thing. I think we are facing in this very moment, because of COVID, a number of pressures for delivering better information. We have two challenges, I think. One is complexity, because clinical trials, vaccines are very complex and it's difficult to explain them. And the second thing is possibly uncertainty. As we see, for example, we had yesterday a terrible day because nobody was able to communicate properly what was happening with one of the vaccines for COVID. Now, how can we actually try to address this issue and try to make all the people understand what's going on? I think that we have a number of different tools, including technologies. As you can read in our deliverables, we have 2 scientific papers in which we explore the possibility of using from social networks to technical devices to multimedia, to videos, to interaction, quizzes, and so on. I think we should have very clear the idea that we can use all of them, depending on the target we have. And if needed, we should use them to tailor the informed consent. As has been said already, co-creation is the key, because actually, if we try to understand what's happening in the brain of the patients, it's much, much simpler. Actually, the experiments we did were also including low literacy participants in the workshop and in the workshops. And this might be one of the things that we should follow also in practice. The problem will be we will have enough time to do all this work. And actually, we will have time to make different types of informed consent to every single level of not only digital literacy, but also health literacy. I think we should, because otherwise clinical trials will not advance, will not go better. And actually, we will be facing again and again the problems that we live today.
Thank you, Alberto. Let's move on now to Jaime Fons and the guidelines itself, because it's also stimulated a lot of questions. Jaime, let me ask you about the current guidelines limitations. How can we mitigate them? And if we have identified, you made a little introduction during your presentation, but if you could elaborate a little bit more.
Okay, as I said before, the main guidelines limitation comes from the scope of this project. That it was 3 years, at the end 3 years, almost 4 years, and we have an amount of budget, so we couldn't go beyond all the different situations. Okay, but I think that in fact, if we consider the core body of our guidelines with this idea of the co-creation and to know your population when you are developing your materials and all that, probably you can arrive to cover a lot of these different limitations that they exist and that we met because, for example, when we talk only about that our study, our project and the guidelines have only recommendations for minors, okay, and we then included age population. If you consider to use the co-creation to study this population when you are preparing your information materials, probably you are also to include them. Another thing that our guidelines have is that we have done this core body, and later we have done different facets and different tools that they go through this different populations. So if later we are able to continue our research in this line, probably we can continue adding new facets and tools.
Okay, thank you very much, Jaime. There's also a question then how to handle multicentric and multilingual projects, especially in the international level. And the question is, do we start the process in one site in a given language and then it is translated, or do we encourage to do a specific informed consent for each country or center? Well, this is a very, very interesting question, and we are really looking into that because, as mentioned, what we did is that we validated the same informed consent information gathered in one country, and we are validating that in 2 other different countries, so in 3 different. The result will be next week, so that will give us an insight of the need, at least in Europe, of producing different informed consents for different cultural diversities. And what we definitely know is that if we are aiming to other cultures coming from outside of Europe, we have to include those in the co-creation of the materials. And so another question that maybe Laura Palazzani was for you. Is the new technologies will be used more often for new studies. The electronic informed consent is an issue today in some countries, as local laws are different between countries. France, for instance, has a high protection of personal information of the patients and to use health data hosting platforms. Will the regulation be harmonized between the countries so that we can use the same in all Europe?
Thank you very much, Javier. Yes, that's a big problem of regulation in order to harmonize and to use in an interoperability way all the data all over Europe. And I know the Commission is going to elaborate a new governance act about data and the harmonization in Europe. And so it will be really very important for informed consent in order to share the information. And above all now, the real problem is with genomic data, but also with all clinical data, in order to improve research and improve the participation of citizens to this research. And there is a big project, One Genome Project, that's exactly the idea is to make everyone participate in this very big project. So I think the real challenge is the interoperability of informatic systems in order to share data and above all, to raise awareness in citizens and participants to research of the risks for privacy, but also of the opportunities in sharing data with other participants for the improvement in research.
Thank you very much, Laura. Very illustrating. We move now to a question that has been shaped different ways but asked a lot, and it's about dynamic consent. So there has been some questions about practical approach to what has been described as the dynamic consent process. Is there any example of forms of consent that are dynamic instead of broad consent? I think this question, Jaime can help us, maybe.
Okay. When we talk about that dynamic consent, usually is that you give the possibility to the person who has donate his or her samples to a biobank or something like that, or piece of data. You give them the possibility to be accepting or refusing the use of this data or this sample in a specific study. Okay, in this case, what we thought it was that it's better to have a broad consent that gives a first agree to participate, or you accept to participate, and you give them the possibility to be getting information about the use of these samples or this data, to being able to be refusing it. Because the problem of some dynamic consents, if you have the dynamic consent and you have to be accepting each time, is that it makes it very difficult to know with how many samples you count for a study. And a lot of times, maybe just because people is not accepting this, the use, you are not using them. So we think that it's important that you have first this acceptation to be used, this consent, and later you use the dynamic consent only to refusing the ones you don't want to use. Okay.
I don't know if there's anyone in the consortium that would like to add something of what we have been asked.
Yes, Javier. As far as I understand, the dynamic of informed consent should be focused not merely in the form at the beginning of the process. As we have emphasized, the process has 5 different steps. And the form is going to cover, in part, the legal thing. But there is the world of ethics and best practices, and how researchers should incorporate, using our guidelines, this personal approach that is dynamic by itself and that is not centered in the form. It's centered in the professionals, in the mediators, in accompanying the subjects of experimentation. One of the challenges of I-consent from the beginning was, of course, this idea of the process instead of the form. And I think the dynamic should move in the process, and not only and how we can regulate or establish norms to make the process dynamic.
Okay, thank you, Alberto. And now there's a broad question that I would like if anyone of the consortium would give a sip of the question is, what is the future of the I-consent, or more than the I-consent, of the guidelines? How you see the future of these guidelines? Is anyone
Just a few words, and I will also get the opportunity to say bye-bye to everybody because I have to jump into another meeting. I think that there's a lot of things that we can consider about technology, and there's a lot of discussion about the use, for example, of blockchain, but this is just a tool. I think that the future of informed consent is working together with patients. That's my personal opinion, and with this, I say goodbye and thank you so much.
Thank you, Alberto. Totsi. Laura?
Yes, Javier, I just want to tell you that Lawrence Love, who is the head of the Secretariat of the Committee of Bioethics at the Council of Europe, participated to our meeting, and she asked us to, she will help us to disseminate our guidelines in the Council of Europe. And so above all, in the question of the participation of children to research, because it's one of the main points of a strategic action of the Council of Europe for the future. And so I think we, above all, in the question of children, we may disseminate our guidelines all over the Council of Europe, and it will be a very good result of our project.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone would like to add?
Well, in that regard, I would maybe briefly want to mention for the dissemination other projects that are funded by the European Commission under the SWOF's Science, Wit and Force Society. Action is one of the initiatives has resulted in a website, a platform called the Embassy of Good Science, which we actually use as a sort of repository for much of the outputs of the projects that we have funded. And I think that would also be a good channel of dissemination of your guidelines to reach many other researchers that can use your work. And with that, also thank you very much, and a lovely evening to everyone.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Anyone? If not, from the experience that we are having from the Vigida clinical trial and the comprehension, the good comprehension of the information that parents receive, we are pushing at least those clinical trials and those studies that are not supported by industry, because this is another world. We will encourage them to use this strategy of co-creation using the new technologies. In fact, together with Professor Van Delden, we are participating in an IMI project. We are involved in the ethics of this new form of clinical trials, which are and we are pushing to use this co-creation of the informed consent. Definitely, in our unit, we are starting participating or working more with the patients, so that we approach them. And then we will also go to not only the European Commission, but other instances that support projects and give money to include some budget for the co-creation of the informed consent. And definitely we will continue doing research and validating new technologies. Anyone would like to add anything else?
Javier, I would like to thank you as coordinator of iConsent, and the wonderful people we have been meeting in the last 3 years, and to encourage the audience, do not be afraid and enjoy participating in doing research in collaborative initiatives, because it's fascinating. We have been learning a lot during these 3 years, and we are in positions of irradiating this in our universities, our institutions, and I think this is also important. And mainly because I think it has been a very friendly and responsible consortium, and I want to acknowledge all of you that have been making possible this international collaboration and the friendship that we have been created. I'm going to miss you, and I hope to have the opportunity to collaborate in the future for the common good, for the good of the European Union. And I know that probably this audience with open to the public is not the best place to tell you, but also in the presence of Professor Delden and Elisa, try to support these kind of initiatives that can give a lot of benefits for the people and for the society.
Okay, thank you very much, then. Thank you very much, all the attendees of this presentation of the guidelines. That has been a 4-year, very hard work. Thank you, all the consortium. I will definitely miss you and hope that we can continue with this path that we have started. Thank you very much indeed, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.